Hello everyone, welcome back to Ansarkari. So in the previous video, we completed with the Pareto optimality concept, which is under the modern welfare criteria. So now we will be linking perfect competition and how does it fit into the idea related to Pareto optimality, which was postulated by Wilfredo Pareto, the economist. So we have firstly the first theorem of welfare economics, and this is also known as the fundamental theorem. So under this we will be studying the linkage between these two. So first theorem of welfare economics. So this postulates that the general competitive equilibrium, that is Pareto optimal. So general competitive equilibrium, that is under the equilibrium which exists in perfect competition. So again, the conditions, the first order conditions that we covered, like there were total 7 conditions under the Pareto optimality, which needs to be satisfied in order to ensure that we reach the Pareto optimal distribution of resources. So the same conditions are applicable. Again, we can just go through the title, like we talked about efficiency of exchange, efficiency of production, there was allocative efficiency, then the optimum degree of specialization. So all these conditions are satisfied by the perfect competitive market. And the conditions also that we talked about, that MRS for both the consumers need to be same, or MRS equals to MRTS. So that is all valid and satisfied under perfect competition. So this is one thing. Now we see that to meet these conditions, we need to also simultaneously ensure and fulfill some other conditions also. So those conditions to be satisfied along with the first order conditions includes that there should be a general competitive equilibrium should exist in the market. Second is that when you're talking about the second order Pareto optimal conditions, that is also to be fulfilled. So second order Pareto optimal. This is under the first theorem of welfare economics. Pareto optimal conditions. And what are those second order conditions? So the indifference curves. And when we're talking about the transformation curve of the community and also the products, it should be convex to the origin. So this is in a way the shape of these curves, and convex to origin has this shape. This is the shape of the curve. Then another condition is that the consumer's MRS, which is the marginal rate of substitution, and this is given by the slope of the indifference curve, and the MRTS that we covered in the previous video itself should be declining at equilibrium. This should be ensured. Then transformation curve. So here it is, the isoquants. Isoquant reflects the equal level of quantity that is being produced by each curve which is drawn. So isoquant and IC, the indifference curves are convex. Transformation curve is concave to the origin. So the transformation curve, which is also the utility possibility curve, takes this shape. So this is concave to the origin. So these are the second order conditions that also needs to be simultaneously fulfilled under the perfect competition. And when we say that we are fulfilling all the first order and the second order conditions, even after fulfilling that, there is no guarantee. There is no guarantee under the perfect competition that there would be again, we are achieving the Pareto optimality condition, which leads to maximization of the social welfare. Because if we see like the exception, why we are saying that there's no guarantee or certainty after meeting these both the order conditions. For example, if under increasing returns to scale, we see that MRS and MRTS, they are not equal to each other, and this is one the condition that they need to be equal to each other. Then third condition, we talk about externalities. Externalities like the diseconomies of scale or the economies of scale has certain externalities which can be like which impacts the production efficiency and the welfare. For example, the pollution or the greenhouse gases which are released is a form of negative externality. So here in this, externalities in consumption and the production processes, they do not exist. That is assumed here. That does not exist. This is one of the conditions. So it means that the production and the consumption decisions by the people in the society, they're not impacting each other. But again, in real life, this is not the case. Then fourth is that for perfect competition to ensure the Pareto optimality, and we say that Pareto optimality is one idea or it is one thing, but achieving Pareto optimality again will not ensure that we are moving closer towards social justice, or there's no direct relationship between achieving Pareto optimality and social justice. So perfect competition and Pareto optimality will not ensure social justice. And this, again, social justice is also one of the elements which impacts the social welfare. For example, we can say like the inequalities in the ownership of resources. That is again an element of social justice. So this was the first theorem of welfare economics. Now we move on to the second theorem of welfare economics. So under this second theorem, we say that according to it, for every Pareto optimal situation, there is a competitive equilibrium which will exist given the initial income distribution in the society. So it states for every Pareto optimal distribution, there is a competitive equilibrium in the society. So we can represent this through the Edgeworth box analysis. So OA is the origin for consumer A, OB is the origin for consumer B. Here on x-axis we have good X, and the quantity of it represented. On y-axis we have good Y, which is represented. So we will be drawing the IC curves for both the consumers representing their satisfaction level. So this is A1, this is A2, A3, and each higher level is representing higher level of satisfaction by the consumer. And this is for, they need to be tangent. So this is for consumer B, and the higher levels, like this is B1, B2, B3, and this is B3, this one, and this is B4. So when we join these tangency points, we get the contract curve. So let's say we are at point K. This is point K. And inside this also we can draw the indifference curve. And this line P1 line, which we have drawn from the tangency point, is representing the slope, and this also passes through point K. So here we see that initial distribution of the resources is represented by point K. And then under the perfect competition, we see that can lead to price ratio of goods, which is being represented this price line P1 that we have drawn from the tangency point inside this area. And so that we see the ratio of the prices that we achieve, we, let's say, name this point as S. When we move from point K to point S, we will see that this represents a higher level of social welfare, and which is also a point on the contract curve. So how it is representing higher level of social welfare? If you see the level of indifference curve, initially point K is on this indifference curve of consumer A. Here you will see we move to a higher level of IC, which represents higher level of utility or the satisfaction. Similarly, for consumer B, we are at initially this indifference curve and we move on to again a higher level of IC. So that is why point S represents higher level of social welfare compared to point K. So it is better to move from point K to point S. So this is what the second theorem of welfare economics postulates and states. Now the question arises that does the perfect competition always ensures Pareto optimality and the maximization of social welfare? So we'll look into this. Always ensure maximum social welfare. So for this, we see that again, when we are meeting the second order conditions and the first order conditions for the Pareto optimality, there is no guarantee that social welfare is also maximized. Here we saw the point related to social justice, that there's no direct relationship between Pareto optimality and the social welfare in a way like social justice, we can say. Second, we say that when the possibility or the production transformation curve is drawn, there is a condition again that it might not be concave. So as we stated under the condition that production transformation curve or the utility possibility curve needs to be concave to the origin. The production transformation curve should be concave. Now we will see when it is not concave. So this can be also one of the scenarios where we will again see that it will not maximize the social welfare. That's what we are analyzing. So one IC indifference curve we have drawn. Good X and good Y, always these are going to be the variables on Y-axis and X-axis. So let's say this is the shape of the production transformation curve. Initially, so far we have seen it takes this shape, which is the most common. But here we are comparing two situations. So you can see that in the indifference curve that we have drawn, they are tangent to the transformation curve at 2 points. Let's say B, A, B point are there. Now you can see at point B, the transformation curve is concave, and at point A, it is convex. So although we say that at point A also MRS is equal to MRTS, which is again the condition which leads us to saying that we are at Pareto optimality, and this is again satisfied at B also. But the second order condition that the transformation curve needs to be concave is not being satisfied at A. So again, there is no guarantee or short possibility that always Pareto optimality will lead to maximization of the social welfare. Then we say that there's no reason to believe here that maximization or the maximum social welfare is always going to be a situation, because in that case, if we say that Pareto optimality equals to maximum social welfare, then we can say that we are also asserting in a way that the existing factor endowments is socially desirable. So that is also again we can say an ideal situation that we're talking about. But again, in real life, we always do not see that the distribution of the factor endowments it is socially desirable, that we can clearly see from the inequality of the ownership of the resources or the wealth which is there in the society. And the fifth would be like the Pareto optimality, and the idea is majorly based on utility. So this has been critiqued by Amartya Sen, that this is not an adequate measure. Utility, again, the sole measure, and it is not the adequate measure to say that again how the social welfare would be impacted. Other factors are not included, which are again the qualitative measures. Then externalities, when we're talking about, so when externalities exist, we see the social marginal cost deviates the private marginal cost, and which should not happen actually. So again, not at Pareto optimality. And lastly, we can say here that whatever the available resources, they need to be fully employed. Now, again, there is no guarantee that under perfect competition, all the resources which are there will be fully employed or not. So, there is no guarantee of full employment in the economy. So, again, we are not at the maximum social welfare. So, with this, here we complete the things related to the theorem of Pareto optimum. Now, we move on to the new welfare economics. The Pareto optimality theorem is also known as the modern welfare economics. So now it is moving on to the new welfare economics related theorems. So this is again an improved version of the modern welfare economics theorem so far postulated, and this is known as the compensation principle. On this, we have been asked questions also, that how compensation principle is an improvement of the Pareto optimality condition. So we'll be clear with this once we are clear with the idea related to what is the compensation principle, which has been given by Kaldor and Hicks in one theory, and Scitovsky, who's again the name of another economist, who has again critique the theorem given by Kaldor and Hicks, and again this is an improvement over the compensation principle proposed and postulated by Kaldor and Hicks. So firstly, we will cover the Kaldor and Hicks theorem and the welfare criteria given by them. So first, we'll see what are the assumptions taken first. So we see that satisfaction of the individual that is independent of all other factors. It is again not determined by, or it is not depending upon the satisfaction of another consumer. Then it considers that there are no externalities, which is again one of the limitations also. Then taste of consumer, tastes and preferences are constant, they do not change. And also one of the most important one is that they assume social welfare is a function of the level of production in the society. So this is very important assumption taken here. And it is also considering ordinal utility. So this is again the same as we saw under the Pareto optimum theorem also. And again, no interpersonal comparisons. So this is again one of the core ideas, where we will see the progressive theorems will consider the interpersonal comparisons and the value judgments also. So ordinal utility and no interpersonal comparisons have been taken. So now we will be going forward with the Kaldor Hicks welfare criteria. So since you can see, it is named as a compensation principle. So Kaldor stated that whenever there is an organization, economic organization of resources, which makes someone better off and others, they become worse off, then we can say the change of the resources in the organization, it will increase the welfare if we say that those who gain after the distribution, the pattern of distribution of resources, they can compensate the losers. Losers are the people of the section society who become worse off. If their loss is being compensated by the people who are gaining, and still the gainers, they are better off. They still remain better off. Then we say that it is again leading to social welfare, that type of organization of resources. That is why it is called the compensation principle. In the Pareto optimum, we just stated that if any reorganization of the resources is making someone better off, but not, it is not making anyone worse off, in that case, that point or distribution is called to be Pareto optimum, leading to social welfare. But here we say that few people will become worse off, but their losses can be compensated by the people who gain, again depending upon the amount of gain that they actually receive. And after that redistribution of gains to the losers, also after compensating them, also the gainers, they still remain in a gainful situation. So that is what Carl stated. So you can see that the language of this compensation principle is from the perspective of gainers, which has been given by Calder. And this has been supported by Hicks also in the same theory, but he postulated this idea from the perspective of losers in the society. So his statement states that a change is improvement if the losers in the society, after the distribution of resources in changed situation, which is again how the resources have been distributed, that is a change situation, they cannot profitably bribe the gainers to not change from original situation. So this is just a change in the language. The essence remains the same. So it is from the loser's perspective. Now we'll understand this with the help of a graph. So on y-axis, we plot the B's utility. On x-axis, we plot A's utility, how that changes. We draw our production transformation curve, or the utility curve. We plot few points to understand this. So our transformation curve can be named as DE. And let's say we consider the movement from point Q to T. So Q is the initial distribution of resources in the society. So when we're talking about movement from point Q to Q to T, we can see that the welfare of B will increase because the utility of B increases till this level from point Q. So B's utility improves, but you can see A's utility will decline. So A will become worse off. B is becoming better off because A's utility will decline up to this level. Because again, horizontal movement, the x-axis is showcasing the A's utility. So that's how we get to know. So this is the change happening when we are moving from Q to T. Now, because B is gaining, now B can lead, or B can redistribute those resources to compensate the loss in A's utility, and we move from point T to point R. So when we are reaching point R, now you can see that from Q to R, again, B still remains better off after redistribution from T. There's a slight reduction, but still from comparison from Q, B is still better off. And again, A is at same level of utility which it was at point Q. So then we say that yes, after the compensation principle, the situation is becoming better. It is leading to increase in the social welfare. So that is how we can explain the functioning of the compensation principle proposed by Kaldor and Hicks. Now, there can be one more situation how we can explain compensation principle is, let's say, when these utility possibility curve shifts out, will it still depict the increase in social welfare or not, is the question that we will look into. So here we plot A's utility, and y-axis it is B's utility. So this is the initial utility possibility curve, let's say UV, and this curve shifts out, or we also say that it shifts rightward. Now it becomes U dash V dash. So we'll draw points to be again clear with the understanding how the social welfare will change when we are moving from the lower curve to the higher curve. So our initial distribution is at point Q, which we can see on the utility possibility curve UV. And let's say the curve is shifting out because of change in the economic policy by the government. So this is one of the reasons why it can shift out. Now, when the curve shifts out, the consumers of the society will see their position changes to point R. Initially, we were at point Q. Now, after the shift, we reach point R. So from R, you can see what change is happening in the utility. You can see B's utility has declined up to this level, and A's utility has increased from Q to R. So A becomes better off, A is gaining. Now A has the advantage or the opportunity to redistribute the resources to compensate the loss, this amount of loss in B's utility, so that after redistribution we reach point S. Now you can see at point S and point Q, B's utility remains exactly the same. There is no loss, no gain. And still after redistribution, you can see A's utility, still it has gained in the change. So after compensation principle, again we see that even when the utility possibility curve is shifting out, that will also represent increase in the social welfare. So be it the movement on the same social welfare, the same utility possibility curve that we saw here, there was one single curve, or be it the outward shift in the curve, we see that the social welfare will be increasing. So this is what is the idea related to Kaldor and Hicks compensation principle. Another theory under this same welfare economics is the new welfare economics that we started with is the Scitovsky Paradox. So under this, why it is being called a paradox? So here Scitovsky, he stated that let's say there are two positions in the society, position B and position A. If we consider that if position B is better than A position in the society, according to, we are using again the Kaldor and Hicks compensation principle, we are able to state that B is better than A. But the Scitovsky, he states we can also prove the reverse to be true, that A is also better off than the economic distribution of resources being stated by point B, using the same compensation principle by Kaldor and Hicks. So now this becomes a paradox. How do we say that both the things are true? B is also better off than A, and A is also better off than B. So this is the paradox, and again the graph for it. B's utility A's utility. Now this is one utility possibility curve, let's say JK, and another utility possibility curve intersecting, let's say GH. So here we draw 2 points. So DE point. Now we see that initial R position or the economic distribution of resources in the society is being showcased by point C. Point C on the JK possibility curve, utility possibility curve. And due to again policy changes, we see the curve shifts and it changes its position to GH, where now the consumer, the society, moves to point D. Initially we were at C, now we are at point D. So we say that D is better off than point C. Now for again the justification for this is again the Kaldor and Hicks criteria compensation principle, that when we see B's utility will decline but A's utility will increase, the redistribution of resources we will see, we move to point E, where we can say that it would be not E, it would be F. So D to F, it has to be on the same utility possibility curve. So at F, you can say that utility of B remains exactly at the same level, but A's utility still increases after redistribution. So that is why D point represents better social welfare, or it is better off compared to point C. Now, the question is, if we are able to prove that D is better than C, we can also prove C is better off than D also, which is again, it's reverse. This is what we stated here in the paradox statement also. So how we can say that C is better off? So when we see again that when we are moving from now point D towards point C, so in this case, you will see now B will be gaining. So B gains this much, A loses this much. So again, when we are compensating from point C, we move to point E. Here, A's utility will be at same level. Still, we see that B utility will be increasing. So this would be the increase in B's utility. So we are able to prove both the things, this one also and its reverse also, using the Kaldor and Hicks compensation principle. So that is what the paradox is. So this is the explanation of paradox graphically. So what has been the solution given by Scitovsky so as to resolve this paradox? So he proposed the double criteria of welfare, where he states two tests needs to be satisfied. One is again the same Kaldor and Hicks compensation principle that needs to be satisfied, and second, it states that there is a reversal test. If that is satisfied, we will say that there would be no paradox. So according to the reversal test, we see that the gainers, they are able to persuade the losers to accept the change in the situation, but at the same time losers are not able to persuade the gainers to not change from their original position. When both of these things are satisfied, we say reversal test is passed and we fulfill the conditions. So here also we see so initially we are at Q, draw two possibility curves. So when we are moving from Q to, let's say, G, we will be redistributing and reaching the position R, which would be satisfying the first test, which is the Kaldor and Hicks test, and we can say that point G is better off than Q. But when we are talking about again reversing, when we have to prove that Q is better off than G, that cannot be stated, and there are no valid reasons here because these 2 points are on different possibility curves. So again, the reversal test is also satisfied, and we say that Now truly the paradox is not there, and G is actually better off than the distribution of resources at point Q. So there are certain, we can say, critique points also related to the Scitovsky paradox and the Kaldor and Hicks theory. So here, when we go through the critique, which has been majorly given by another economist, Baumol and Little is the name of the economist who critiqued their theory. So they pointed out that Calder, he is not giving any new criteria because he assumes that welfare is a function of increase in the level of production in the society. He is just defining, is giving definition of increase in wealth. That is, he says that this is being denoted by the compensation principle. Otherwise, when we say that when we're talking about increase in welfare, so that will be depending upon the increase in production. So if the production the society is increasing, the aggregate output increases, aggregate income increases, it will lead to increase in the social welfare. So this is one point. And then again, they state that even the compensation principle is not free from value judgments. And value judgments are not considered in the theory. So it is not free from value judgments because again, it says that compensation should be made, but it is not talking about how it would be made. Or when we're talking about compensation in monetary terms, then still how realistic is that idea and how transparently that is done would also be impacting the social welfare. And again, because of increasing inequality, also if we look at the real life, we see that poorer are becoming more poorer because of widening inequality. Then we say that Calder and Hicks, they stated that production is given priority under their compensation principle, and they're not talking about actually the distribution pattern, which is also one of the qualitative factors. So this is also not justified in real life. So they are considering the potential welfare. Potential welfare. What is the potential and not the actual welfare? Like what should be done. And again, external effects are not considered. How external effects would be changing. For example, climate change, how that would be impacting the social welfare, the consumption, the production pattern is not being considered. So here we are completed with the new welfare economics. So Calder and Hicks compensation principle is important, and the Scitovsky's paradox, the idea and the double welfare criteria that has been postulated as a solution to the Scitovsky's paradox. So that's all, and thank you so much for joining us on Ansarkari.